Heyo everyone, welcome back to Theonopolis. So today we are building the first Lifthill of the Atlantis coaster, which is going to be themed around fire and the volcanic eruption. And if you're new here or somehow missed the last episode and don't understand the volcanic and fire theme of this Lifthill, I highly recommend you watch the last episode because I do explain it there. But with that out of the way, I quickly want to somewhat dive in the comments of the last episode, because two of those comments by Nova and Monster Party brought up two possible locations of Atlantis. So with that, I thought there's still a lot of interest in is Atlantis real? Where is it supposed to be? And I think it's just, of course, Atlantis as a story is very interesting because it's basically just the biggest what if story. Does it exist? Does it not exist? Is it just a story, or is there something actually going on? Was Atlantis a really advanced city, or was it just a somewhat mighty city? And how did it disappear? All those aspects of the story. So I do understand, of course, why the Atlantis story is so interesting, because again, it's the biggest what if story. It could be there, it could not be there. And because it's an unfinished story, as I would say it, because we don't have yeah, it's not there, or yeah, it's actually there. We're still debating that. I think most historians would probably say, oh yeah, it's just a cautionary tale made up by Plato to basically just say don't be greedy and don't be like Atlantis and basically pillage the world. And yeah, Atlantis is really just a big cautionary tale when you really dive deep about it, because it always tells about the Atlanteans somehow either defying the gods, becoming too greedy, or being too prideful, and that actually ties into defying the gods because they were too prideful or something like that. And yeah, I really myself believe that's just a cautionary tale, maybe with inspiration from actual events. In the last episode I brought up the volcanic eruption at Terra, or nowadays it's called Santorini, which is an island north of Crete. But it's just the story is in some way unfinished, and humans or humanity as a whole just want something to be finished. We want something to be over and done with so that we can move on to the next thing. Or at least that's how I think. Because it's just, if something is left unfinished, if you're reading a book, you're not going to stop at the second to last page or something like that. You are going to finish the book then. Or at least want to, unless you forget. Which is mostly my case. If I ever forget to read the book fully, it's usually because I lay it down and forget where it is. Anyway, so as I said before, because I really should get back to what I'm building right now, Atlantis is just the biggest what if story, and because of that, I think it's just really interesting because you can let your imagination run wild, because there's just enough information to do that, actually, to let your imagination run wild, but there's not enough information to really give a definitive answer to is it real or was it just a made up story. But with that, I'm going to go back into what I'm building, which is basically the scene, or the dark ride scene that is in the Lifthill, because I wanted to have a dark ride scene in the Lifthill because the water sections of this coaster are actually pretty small. So I had to a little bit improvise. So yeah, all the Lifthills are going to include a dark ride aspect. But when it comes to Lifthills, including a dark ride aspect is I think this is the most difficult thing I've done so far. Even compared to the Pharaohs, which you might have seen in the background, that was actually easier because the Pharaohs is a huge building. You can hide things in it and nobody will see it. But because this Lifthill, well, I don't like chunky Lifthill, so I can't make the Lifthill very big, or I don't want to. But I need to have enough space to actually fit something in it. So the buildings that I built in it are basically just a wall, making some kind of fake roof. And it's maybe a meter thick of just a front or just a facade. But as I said before, I didn't want to make the Lifthill very big or chunky, or at least very dense. So the first edition of the Lifthill just was a straight up box. Like just a box. And then I cut down the lower part of it, and basically as I'm building it right now, I made an archway so that it isn't just a really dense and really boxy building. Like, it's still a little bit of a box because it's still like a rectangle, but it's a little bit less of like a boom. There's actually in a little bit airiness to it because it's a little bit more open. But with this archway, I didn't make like a round or circular arch because I've probably already said this in 10 other episodes before, but the Grecians, to my knowledge, didn't really like, you know, the round archways that the Romans really liked with their aqueducts, and they are completely overrunning the Colosseum and all. Well, most Roman big buildings do have those round circular archways or arches, and the Grecians really, from what I know, didn't really like that. So this archway is, if I'm correct, triangular or just straight, blocky a little bit. And that's, I have built this sort of like arch, or well, it looks a bit like a bridge, and it's referenced from a bridge. And I've built bridges like this in Theonopolis before. Again, I really hate building bridges, but somehow for me this didn't feel like building a bridge, so for some reason this wasn't for me as tedious as most bridges are. Yeah, my brain is sometimes really weird. If I don't think something is a bridge, then I don't approach it like a bridge, even though it's completely similar to a bridge. Anyway, so for the archway I didn't want to make it round, but for some reason I'm building some kind of like alcove, if I'm correct, or just some kind of like, well, I'm just going to call it an alcove, and probably if I'm wrong, I know Alia is going to burn me, but it's just practically ripped out of actually a church, or like a Catholic church from like the, let's say, 16th century, 17th century. But it's not historically accurate. This, well, it could be, because it could be like a shrine thing, but the complete archway and such isn't historically accurate. And again, if you're new here and think like, oh, Theonopolis is completely historically accurate, no. Theonopolis is basically my own version of like what I like about Greek architecture and what I don't like. Well, there are very few cases of me building something with like architecture that I don't like. There's like maybe like all the flat roofs. That's mostly like the things I sometimes don't like, because yeah, it becomes pretty boring to just have a flat roof all the time. But that's more historically accurate because from what I know, probably tiled roofs or slanted roofs were just a lot more expensive to build. So yeah, there are a lot of flat roofs, and that's like the one thing that I don't really like about Theonopolis. So yeah, don't know where I wanted to go further with that, so I was just like a abrupt pause and just like, yeah. That's like my stop word. If I don't know what to say, it's just, yeah. But with the archway, for me really worked out, but it was a little bit weird fitting it under the Lifthill. And also weird because the Lifthill is obviously massive. Like every Lifthill is going to be massive unless you have like a really low kiddie coaster. And also I want to make the Lifthills very massive so that you can go with a lot of speed through all the, well, through the entire coaster. Because I don't really build coasters that are accurately or just realistic. I just build coasters that I would enjoy, or that I would scream my complete lungs out. Because it has a little bit of like a dive coaster feel, with just the big drops. But yeah, if I rode this coaster, I would have probably pissed myself. Because I think that's like a 30 meter or at least 20 meter drop in a coaster or in a car train. Yeah, a train. But a train which doesn't really, you know, you have basically security on like your legs, but nothing above that. So yeah, I would have pissed myself on this coaster. But back to the Lifthill, because that took a weird turn. When it came to the Lifthill, I didn't want it to look Atlantean from the outside, because that would just stand out like a sore thumb. And if you're new here, Atlantean for me is just like a mix of like Minoan, which is to me like precursor ancient Grecian, and ancient Grecian, and some kind of like fantasy architecture. The fantasy is mostly just to let my imagination run wild, because again, we don't know if Atlantis actually existed or if it's just a story, so with this coaster I can really just go completely berserk. Of course, a little bit within reason. Just a tiny bit within reason. But to make it, well, to again hammer on like the historical accuracy point, because I do that every video, these windows obviously, when it comes to like ancient Grecian architecture, aren't historically accurate. These would probably be just complete open walls, kind of feeling a bit more like a balcony. But because the Lifthill contains a dark ride section, it needs to be contained. You don't want to see the dark ride section from the outside. So I did have to resort to using windows. Though I do think it worked out in some way, but I'm still not completely happy with how it looks. So I will probably work on it. And also quickly, by the way, I'm not going to build the entire Lifthill on camera, because that would have taken, well, an hour. Or at least not an hour in actual building, but that would make the video an hour long. So before you think like, oh, you only built this for in like 20 minutes. No, this is like 2 hours of footage sped up. Yeah. But with the upper part of the Lifthill, you can already see me placing down the roof, which already gives you the idea of a temple. And if you've watched the last episode, you might already know that I'm like really against using temples or really official looking buildings in this coaster, because when it comes to the Atlantis story, the usage of like temples or like ancient Grecian temples and such is for me just really overused. Like, I don't really like how they just resort to just building ancient Grecian temples, ruining them, because it's just weird for me. Like, it's just overused too much. But then I do it for like the top of a Lifthill. So I'm basically going against what I said in the last episode, which I sometimes or frequently actually do. But it just felt right. Because at the top of the Lifthill, like from the start of the Lifthill, you just look up at this big, well, relatively big temple. And it's just very intimidating. And then when you got closer to the temple, you can actually see that's also on fire. Quickly also want to note, yeah, I'm going to do the effects also off screen, because I already said if I built the entire Lifthill, it would have made the video an hour long. If I also did the effects of a video, it would have made it 2 hours. Because with the effects, it's just a lot of trial and error, because you're really confined to a very tiny space, and the effects don't really like that. They really want to just go outside, they want to just spread around, and like one effect actually couldn't be contained to this Lifthill, but on the outside it looks a little bit like flower petals. Yeah, I'm talking about the flying embers. It just really worked with the scene, but it's spread to outside of the Lifthill, but it looks so pretty and it worked, so I kept it. And again, from the outside it looks a little bit like flower petals, so sometimes you need to a little bit sacrifice what you wanted because you just want something that looks pretty. Well, that's actually most of my buildings. Like, I want historical accuracy, but then the building turns out prettier when I don't go for historical accuracy. And then I go with pretty. Yeah. But for the dark ride scene in the Lifthill, I wanted to go for a street view or a street scene because, well, last scene or the scene before this is welcoming you to Atlantis, so you go through like a marketplace. So it would feel really like an abrupt change if I suddenly went to, let's say, a mountainside or something. And I really just like giving that a little bit more of a human touch to the scene or to the dark ride by really showing you like the impact it had on like just the people. I didn't want to just show the impact on like beautiful buildings and such. I just really wanted to build like scenes that were just in a regular street, which of course is completely on fire because volcanic eruptions, and yeah, there actually isn't going to be any lava, or at least not a lot. Like, I think there are 2 effects of lava which are like tiny to basically mimic like explosions or impacts, but beyond that, no lava, because if you want, or if you get killed by lava, you actually have to try to get killed by lava, because lava moves at like a snail's pace. Like, you're more likely to be killed by the toxic gases that basically get spurted out from the volcano. The destruction that of course your volcano causes with, like, you know, buildings collapsing, furniture collapsing and all that. You're probably more likely to be killed by that, or to be killed by the heat. If you don't want to hear what I mean with killed by the heat, skip forward 1 minute, but basically there are waves of heat coming down the mountainside or the volcano side, which are like so hot that if you get in contact with them, basically the water in your head starts to boil and your brain explodes. Yeah, that's what happened to the people in Herculaneum. So if you're skip forward because you didn't want to hear what happened with heat deaths, you are now at a save point. But for the rest of the scene, because I'm not going to build the entire Lifthill, I probably have already mentioned this before, but I have a squirrel head, so I'm probably forgetting that because I got caught up in another story. But because I'm not building the entire Lifthill, I'm going to show you one side of the Lifthill, or the scene that I built in the Lifthill, so that you can kind of see what I built on the other side, because it's pretty similar. It's just building houses or other civilian buildings, as I would say. And then just going for like, well, the houses are actually just walls. Like, there's no volume, as it were, to them. It's just almost like if you would see like a prop or a house in like a movie scene. They're usually just facades or fronts with like a little bit of structure beside them to support them. And the idea is a little bit similar with this, because again, there's not a lot of room. I couldn't build entire buildings because then I would get a very chunky Lifthill. I didn't... What did my voice do there yet? I think my voice just went up higher than it ever was. Chunky! And now it didn't. For sure, yeah. Alia is probably going to have a lot of fun with that. Well, Alia is also probably going to point out every word I've forgotten. But for the rest of the video, it's a lot of actually grave placing, as it were. This is mostly to simulate the ash that would have just rained down from the volcanic eruption, which would, well, the ash would probably be really hot, so it might have caused some fires. Then of course panic could have caused 1,000 more fires, with people like bumping over lamps and such, causing fires. And then of course in ancient Grecian or Minoan or let's just say Atlantis, would probably have been a lot of like wooden structures or wooden parts of buildings, so those would have caught fire. If so, let's say a lamp gets stumbled over, then yeah, the house is going to catch fire, and then your neighbors are going to catch fire, and then so on. But that's going to be it for today's video. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you do, I hope to see you back in the next one. Don't forget to subscribe to see more of this, and I wish you all an amazing day. See ya!